Yeah, thank you so much. It's nice to be here, and I'll try to answer the question. I've asked a lot recently. It's something like, how is it possible? How it can be possible? We used to see Russia as a good partner with those, I don't know, fancy restaurants in Moscow and sports victories and so on. I'll try to explain somehow. Spreading of deliberate fabrications, verbal or otherwise, slandering of Soviet political and social system, as well as the preparation or dissemination in written, printed, or other forms of works having such a content was punishable under Article 190 of Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic's Criminal Code, granting the violators of this law up to 3 years of imprisonment. In the country, with mandatory state ideology of the freedom of speech was forbidden for almost 70 years, up until the last 80s, the beginning of the well-known Gorbachev's glasnost. This word literally means publicity used in sense of openness and widened dissemination of information. It wasn't just the government's permission to talk openly, both individuals and media, about what has been previously forbidden. It's also meant that they won't be prosecuted for doing so. One of the consequences of glasnost was amnesty for those imprisoned for the wars in 1987. The floodgated previously contained by repressions have burst. The Soviet Union crumbled, and the next came 90s, the special period of our history, known for its extremely difficult economy situation and great level of criminal activity. But at the same time, there were by the far most free decade in the whole Russian history, starting from the very beginning, from the founder of the state, Rurik. We had an independent media, some elements of system of checks and balances that truly worked. Political pluralism, freedom of embassy, and freedom of speech. However, the time was full of problems that modern Russian, especially those who actually witnessed the 90s, tend to think of them as the dark periods of our history. It is difficult to explain to foreigners, but many of them fail to see that freedom to be the byproducts of 90s, but the true reason of all their hardships. The Putin gained to the power, and the 90s came to an end. His politics was a direct response to many people's expectations to clean up the mess. That means to solve all the problems that society have. Putin, on the other hand, meant something else by promising to fix things. He began to systematically erase all the values of civil society, including anyone and anything independent in the whole country. The high oil prices kept rising. It was 17 US dollars for barrel in 1995, and it was 28 USD in the year 2000, and in 2013 it reached 100.5 USD for barrel. So this allowed to create an illusion of economical stability, and as a result, people were loyal to Putin's politics. It is not uncommon for people to confuse that happened after something with the actual consequences of this few leader. A lot of people sincerely supported Putin. Time passed, and the unspoken agreement appeared. The society does not interfere with politics, so that the regime does what it wants, and they get an acceptable economical comfort. The war in Ukraine has put an end to this agreement, which had happened eventually. But the 20 years did allow the repression mechanisms to develop and become well established enough to crack down on the society. Of course, there were people during those 20 years that disagreed with the situation, but because the majority supported it, the regime could deal with the opposition and tighten the screws even further. The most violent repressions happened during the last 8 years, having started right after the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine and annexion of Crimea. The regime acted against independent media, closing them down and prohibiting their activity. The governmental media were under the total control. Non-government organizations were seen as a threat, of course. So their financing from within the country was become extremely difficult. And if an NGO wants to get financial aid from abroad, they were declared by law as foreign agents. This definition granted that organization would receive less help and support within the country, would be easier to prosecute, and had to mark all their products from website to letters, and we still don't have the full list of what we should mark by the sign of a foreign agent. The trick is that this naming, these words also mean a spy, someone who works for other, for the foreign nations against their own. A new legislation was quick to arise. For example, the prohibition of financial aid to the extremist organization. The trick is that it doesn't make much announce that the organization is an extremist one, as long as the government dislikes it. One of those extremist organizations was, for example, well-known anti-corruption foundation led by the opposite politician Alexei Navalny. Another example would be updated legislation about the rehabilitation of Nazism, because it's extremely important for the regime to highlight the war victory in World War II. And due to the constant propaganda, lots of people in Russia, they're confident that Soviet Union was the sole victor of that war. So if anyone says something historical truth about that war, but it goes against the propaganda, that person faces the prison time for up to 5 years. 1.5 years before the full-blown war with Ukraine has started, the regime started the preparation. So we didn't understand that it was a preparation, of course, but finally we did. The independent media were destroyed. Many journalists having to leave the country. We believe that 2 legal entities of Memorial was liquidated by court for the same reasons of preparing to the big war. So we didn't understand it at the time, but on 24th of December of 2022, we finally did. Now Russia is in fact under the military censorship, which cannot be called military censorship, because officially there is no war, only special military operation. The new legislation articles pop up with unusual speed, of course. Now the criminal liability follows for disseminating the false information regarding Russian military forces. If anyone calls on the sanctions towards Russia, It has, or just has a negative public opinion about how the government's forces do their job. That's a crime too. In short, the new crimes are all about society criticizing the government's policy and darking to speak up. We even have a new, I love this very much, we even have a new aggravating circumstance, a crime committed on the grounds of political enmity. So it makes you criminal leader, probably, I don't know. So colleagues, our colleagues from another Russian NGO over the info have collected the data about almost 20,000 people detained for protesting against war and mobilizations since the beginning of full-blown war. These 367 people have been prosecuted according to new military legislation. A lot of them are incarcerated now and serving their time. Law enforcement agencies will detain people for nearly anything. For it's enough to say "Glory to Ukraine" out loud, or complain the letter Z on the wall, or even wear blue and yellow nails. A poet, Artem Kamardin, wrote an anti-war poem. For that, he was tortured, raped, and now he's prosecuted. A municipal deputy, Alexei Gorinov, was convicted for 7 years just for raising a concern about the child art competition being held in Moscow while children in Ukraine are dying. Opposition politician Ilya Yashin has recently convicted for 8.5 years for highlighting the Russian war crimes in Bucha on YouTube, for simply telling the facts that the whole world talks about. In Russia 2022, Meta products, Facebook and Instagram are forbidden as extremistic media. People are afraid to like posts because it can be, they can be incarcerated just for that. Almost all websites that do not conform the official propaganda can only be accessed through VPN. But still, the information finds the way into Russia, semi-legally, bypassing the law, but it does get through. And I think it's extremely important. Propaganda offers a pleasant but totally unrealistic version of reality. And people, even if unwillingly, but start seeing the huge inconsistencies. Sooner or later, even those who still trust the official version of events will have to face the reality and find the true answers. These answers are only possible to comprehend with access of freely distributed, reliable information. Yeah.
Thank you. Please sit down, and Monica.